And I don't always take time to sit and listen to all the different presentations, but this morning I was very, very happy to. The key things that I took away, I'm going to talk about it from a perspective, which is, I created this slide to say that I've been doing IT and OT security for a long period of time, and I had to think back of when did I start selling IT security into industry. And I went back to Bay Networks. Anybody in the room familiar with Bay Networks? Bay Networks ultimately got acquired by Nortel. And as human beings, we tend to seem to make the same mistakes over and over again. Back in the early 90s when I started selling security, so I'm going to age myself. It's the first time I'm saying this because I've been saying 15 to 20 years, but I've been selling security for 28 years now. And in 1992, when I started the industry, the internet wasn't prevalent. And Bay Networks created a product called Instant Internet 100 that I sold. The key thing that I took away from that is that people were ordering internet circuits without any consideration of security in 1992. Today, we're digitally transforming our businesses by adopting new technologies, generally without any consideration of security. So in 28 years, we're still taking and doing the same thing over and over again. I work for a product company. We would say maybe we're a solutions company, but we're also a services company. But one of the big takeaways that I got a big circle on my notebook here is that what we're really talking about is people and process and a huge culture shift. And in that culture shift, one of the things that I think we need to do, and that they were talking about it earlier today, is that we need to be able to bridge the gap. And in bridging the gap, we need to be able to teach our employees empathy. In empathy, what we need to be able to do is understand domain expertise. There's an IT domain, there's an OT domain, there's a building automations domain, there's a building management domain, and that we need to be able to respect that expertise within the domain. The other concept that came up was cyber physical, which is a lot of these different vendors are talking about cyber today, but really what has happened is that we've converged into cyber physical security concerns that we really need to start addressing it all from both cyber and physical. And the last piece that I'll bring up is the safety culture conversation, which is, as culture evolves, we really need to focus on having security and safety culture equal each other, in the respect that security needs to be at that executive group. And with that is that one of the things I heard from this group is engineering discipline. I would say that IT is not an engineering discipline, and OT is an engineering discipline. So from the perspective of that cultural empathy, when working with your IT counterparts, understand that they're not an engineering discipline. And if they can take something away from the OT engineering aspects, IT needs to be better engineered. So I took 5 minutes to talk about that to be able to go into my agenda, which is, in digital innovation, we have risk and reward. And we have common security challenges in digital innovation, and we need to be able to have security considerations for digital innovation. Digital innovation, in my mind, is really the realization phase of digital transformation. And in digital innovation, what's happening is that we're impacting all industries, not just a select few industries, but all industries. And it's being disruptive is that digital transformation being one of those new buzz terms. The reality of it is that digital transformation started to occur in the 1970s. It's not something new to us when we're talking about manufacturing. And when we're talking about OT types of organizations that are digitally transforming their business, the executive for decades have made investment in operational efficiency in technology, right? So we went from early isolated and proprietary systems to the 1970s where we started to introduce serial, to the 1990s where we started to convert serial to IP, to be able to gain greater degree of operational efficiency. And why I say digital innovation is the realization phase of digital transformation is because simply what we're doing is using more technology to be able to converge to become more efficient. So one of the biggest themes that I have when I talk to customers is, I have no budget. The reality of it is that if we talk to the executive in their language, which is, I am gaining operational efficiency by making investments within technology, I simply have a greater degree of cyber exposure because of that, I now can justify the budget. To be able to make it simple, I like to be able to think in simplistic terms because we're really talking about complex things that are happening within your organizations, but we need to be able to think of them in simplistic terms. Digital innovation is also causing increases in attack awareness. Digital attack surface is increasing, perimeters are disappearing, or perimeters are expanding, where we're seeing perimeters with millions and millions of types of perimeters within an environment. We'll talk about 5 or 6 of them here today. We have sophisticated attacks, breaches, ransomware incidences are continuing to increase in volume. We have ecosystem complexity, where we've, over the course of time, we've made a best of breeds approach to be able to protect our systems relative to security. So we end up having too many point products, too many vendors, too much complexity, too much training costs, and not a single pane of glass. We've been promised a single pane of glass for a long period of time. We also have too many alerts, and we also have a skilled shortage relative to security. But that skills shortage is not only extending to security, it's extending to operations. We're seeing a generation start to retire from the perspective of physical operations, and that generation now, the next generation, the millennials, are looking for everything to be digitized. They don't want the physical jobs of the past. To compound things, we are global corporations, and we have multitude of frameworks to deal with, multitude of compliance requirements to deal with. So over the course of the next few days, you guys are going to hear a lot about different frameworks, a lot about different compliance requirements. But what we ultimately need to do is distill that down to a common language and common compliance requirements. So the expanding attack surface. This is covering off the majority of my career, because I started in 1992 in selling into security. We ranged from very simplistic attacks, where people were looking at turning and disrupting services, right? So I remember the eBay attack in 2003. Services just simply went down. No one could gain access to eBay. 2, we had our first major worms in Code Red and Slammer. I'll talk about Slammer, which is port 445 was open to the internet. Slammer worm allowed us to be able to come into the network and then spread laterally. If we start to move forward to something like a WannaCry also used 445, and it used 445 to spread laterally within the environment. So over the course of 17 years, we haven't learned our lessons. Right? We need to be able to start to learn those lessons and start to secure the environments holistically. Everybody in the room is going to be aware and familiar with Stuxnet. I'll talk about it in a future slide. And the next iteration of what we see is ransomware attacks increasing and attacks increasing at an alarming rate because the attackers start to use machine learning and artificial intelligence within swarm bots. So in swarm bots, we haven't seen a swarm bot attack really yet today, but we will. And we believe at Fortinet it will happen in 2020. Those swarm bots, they're able to change the way they communicate. So typical bot networks communicate to a command and control sequence, and that is how we're stopping them today. What will happen in these future aspects is the botnets will start to communicate amongst each other, and then at that point, the security effectiveness of botnet security becomes ineffective in that type of methodology. So I don't know where they're coming from or where they're going. In the digital innovation, we need to be able to move from point products and looking at the edge to being able to safeguard data, safeguard the physical, safeguard systems across the cloud, no matter where they are. We have to start thinking about infrastructure edges and the disruptive nature of those edges, and being able to look at it from the perspective of how do we build a secure access services edge. I talked about this earlier, which is we have too many vendors, too many point products, manual and slow responses. I'll go forward. When I get to another slide, I'll talk about the manual response and then lack of trained people. If we're talking about ICS, every vendor always has to bring up Stuxnet. But for me, I want to be able to be specific about certain aspects of Stuxnet. It required 4 0 days. It required social engineering, and it required an engineer to go on site to physically plug a USB into a Siemens Step 7 process. So that social engineering required that person to get a job, be there from an Iranian perspective, and be physically on site. So that, I would say, definitively, Stuxnet was a physical attack. Fast forward to 2017, early 2018, the whole world changed. The previous attacks were all physical, primarily physical in nature. Triton Crisis was the first cyber physical attack, which is an attack coming from the cyber side into the physical and impacting the safety information systems. Yet, also, we have a global epidemic relative to ransomware. And operations can't operate safely if they can't secure their supply chain appropriately and understand what they need to be able to build. So there's 3 different examples of global attacks that now equal up to approximately $1.7 billion in costs between Merck's Pharmaceuticals, Merck Shipping, and Norsk Hydro. And I will tell you guys, every single one of these guys had good security postures in place. They bought a whole bunch of different point products. What they didn't deal with was the human reaction to the response. And that we really need to be thinking about security not only from the perspective of the products that we put in place, but how human beings are responding to it. I would hazard to say that every single one of these started going into their data centers and pulling cables. You would see on the news where they would say, do not plug into the network with pieces of paper because the network is infected. That response, in my mind, is absolutely, completely inadequate. And that in the days to come, we need to be able to think about response. Our goals have changed. We used to put firewalls at the edge of our network to be able to keep the adversaries out. What we need to be able to do today is make sure that we prevent the adversaries from completing their goal. That's the most important thing. The challenge that we have is when people go to market, we have a complex ecosystem of vendors out there. We have too many point products, too many different vendors. They don't integrate together. And I have a hard time, if I'm a person operating these things, to actually try to decipher what's happening within an attack. So what we need is cybersecurity to mature. Just like every other business matures over the course of time, cybersecurity needs to be mature. And with that is we need to be able to put an ecosystem together that starts from the recognition of the devices within the environment all the way through to the response when we're dealing with it. So how do we support digital innovation and digital transformation? We need to be able to focus towards visibility. Just like I talked about in the early 90s, this is that when we first brought the internet out, people would plug into the internet without taking into consideration a firewall. Then they recognized firewalls and people jumped to it. So there's a lot of hype. In the market space right now, there's a lot of hype to visibility. But if you just simply invest in visibility, you will then become dissatisfied because ultimately what you need is control and actionable intelligence and situational awareness beyond it. But for visibility, it's pretty simply put. There are a lot of different technologies out there to choose from visibility, but understanding the devices within your environment, classifying them, being able to inventory them, and being able to understand the behaviors while continuously maintaining that level of trust. So basically taking a earned trust model, versus an assumed trust model. I need to be able to ensure that I have integrated control. And integrated control, I want to be able to make it in simplistic terminology. I need to be able to make sure that every system and subsystem is doing its job and only its job. Now, I have lots of different technologies. We all have lots of different technologies in the industry to be able to accomplish that. IEC 62443, ISA 95, ISA 99, ISO 27000 series all talk about segmentation, microsegmentation, zones and conduits specifically to the OT industry. We have to be able to get to a point of automated awareness or situational awareness. I like the automated piece because as the attacks get more volumetric, we need to be able to have automation take over because human beings won't be able to keep up. Now, in OT, we don't want automation because we want to be able to keep our systems up and available. Safety and availability is critical, so we need to be able to start to merge that thinking and think about how we're dealing with this. So we need to be able to have centralized tools for logging reporting, continuous trust assessment inside and out, an orchestrated automated response, and human intervention. But where are we today? Most customers that I meet aren't even doing the basics. We need to take into consideration the basics, which are OT networks weren't designed for two-factor authentication, so therefore then we don't deploy two-factor authentication. We need to rethink two-factor authentication in this type of environment. We also have to take into consideration that the threat landscape is increasing. We miss the security basics from the perspective of authentication, and therefore then we need to be able to do a gap analysis of where we are and where we want to go to. And where we want to go to, in my mind, is we need to be able to have visibility, control, situational awareness, and actionable intelligence to be able to have and ultimately lead to appropriate response. So we talked about the ARC framework. I'm going back to the Purdue framework. The key thing from the perspective of the frameworks for me is adopt one of them or adopt multitude of the frameworks out there, and then converge and look at the language, all the different frameworks. They all pretty much say the same thing. But in the industrial space, we're going to have a hard time moving away from the Purdue framework, but we have to take in consideration modern versus legacy applications. And so with that, what I'm showing is authentication boundaries between the modern application to the legacy application of the physical. Because the big difference between what we're dealing with today in comparison to where we were in the past is that the Purdue model was established to control physical process. The enhanced Purdue model needs to be able to deal with physical process, but also the data acquisition that's component of industrial IoT applications. So we need to be able to apply Purdue, have the corporate environment. We have to take in consideration the external environment and how we do remote access, and we have to be able to look at solutions that go across the entire model. So here, what I'm talking about is the types of technologies that could potentially be deployed at each one of these levels: ring networking, layer 2 networking, process control firewall, site firewall, internal segmentation, authentication, access control, internal segmentation, access control relative to the edge, and then IoT and industrial IoT secure gateways. IoT changes the game. It changes the game from the perspective of how we're collecting and how we're distributing data. And then we also have to take into consideration how we share data. So shared data could occur into the cloud, or it could occur in level 3.5 in a shared data modeling between IT and OT. But we have to take those into consideration. I've chosen Purdue, IEC 62443 as the framework that I'm proposing, but the reality of it is that you need to take into consideration all the different frameworks. So moving ahead, securing and security is really being able to understand all of the critical assets within your environment, to be able to deliver safe and reliable environments. It's about building a strategy that focuses towards visibility, control, situational awareness, actionable intelligence to be able to get to an appropriate response. And it's establishing understanding of a framework approach, and use of multiple frameworks, right? So when we're working with our IT peers, they're going to framework off of NIST. They're going to framework off of ISO 27000 series. They're going to framework off of CIS top 20 security controls. We're going to framework off of IEC 62443 and other control frameworks. We want to be able to bridge those, understand that, and then being able to report on all of those different frameworks. So Fortinet, here's the sales pitch. Okay, just want to prepare you guys for it. 2 more slides, sales pitch, and then questions. Fortinet has changed the way that we do things. So my previous boss, the CISO of Fortinet, came from the NSA. The NSA created this internal solution that they talked about, a fabric approach. Fortinet commercialized a fabric approach. He made a decision when he was retiring from the NSA to come to Fortinet because the approach nearly matched what the NSA was doing. And the approach is that we need to be able to intercommunicate between all the different devices to be able to reduce time to protection. And that we need to be able to do that not only within Fortinet products, but as many other vendor products as we possibly can, because that's how we're going to win the game from the perspective of being able to officially communicate and communicate quickly to be able to respond to a swarm bot, right? So I talked earlier about a swarm bot, where the swarm bots are communicating back and forth amongst each other. The response to those swarm bots is a fabric that communicates across between each other, and that we recognize the threat rapidly and we address those threats. So what the Fortinet fabric does is it gives you a broad approach that gives you visibility, an integrated approach that reduces complexity. So in the past, when we put in point products, it was up to the end user to change and configure all of the complexity and the configuration between different vendors. This does it for you. And then we have an automated solution that improves the workflow between all the different security products. So beyond visibility, we have convergence. And visibility is the starting point. Convergence is an increased risk structure. And the Fortinet fabric allows you to be able to take the old controls that you're putting in place and taking care of all the different vendors that you have within the environment and overlay a new approach across the entire environment. So Edmund Burke says the only thing necessary for evil to triumph, I try to combine the 2 words, trivial, is good people to do nothing. We need to respond to the attack surface. So let's not let evil triumph. So for us, digital transformation is a journey, is a long-term goal. I talked about it from the 70s to today. Fortinet looks at it from the perspective of long-term, which is we want to be your long-term partner, not just simply one that's selling you different point products, but something that extends across the long term. So if you have any questions, love to be able to take them now, but we also have a plethora of people here that will be here tonight when the vendor stuff is going on. Ask some questions then. Or if not, reach out to us at this alias. We'll be more than happy to help you guys. And that we are a team that's consultative in nature. I personally don't really care if you buy my products. What I do care is making sure that we're helping you consult to understand that digital transformation journey and how to truly secure the environments. Any questions? I'm going to pick on Francis. Francis, you got to have a question, right? Okay, we got a question.
So Michelle, on the slide you had showing the two layers,
yes.
You had a bar going in and then some data going over to look like an IoT system.
Let me back up to that so that we can specifically get to the audience for that. So what I'm proposing here is a segmentation layer, right? So as an example, to enable some of these technologies, manufacturing has never traditionally had wireless on the plant floor. So therefore, then I have to enable wireless, and I have to be able to segment that wireless away. So I need to have 2 points of communication. One that could theoretically go this direction towards the IoT-based towards those devices, right? So they're in the network to be able to get to that SSID or that specific network to only be able to communicate outbound to a gateway. That gateway could be a cloud-based gateway. It could be a gateway that's residing in level 3.5. Now, I'm told that my diagrams are a little bit too complex sometimes for audiences. And I have a more complex diagram that describes a level 3.5 and how the data goes and flows across it, right? So it's dependent upon the environment and the applications that you're needing. But the key thing here is that as we evolve security, security will become about telemetry. It's not about telemetry today, and it will become about enforcement points. The firewall is dead, long live the firewall, right? Because the firewall will be the enforcement points, but the telemetry will be coming from all of the environments, collecting into a cloud-based application. In that cloud-based application, we could theoretically make some security decisions. But in that solution, many customers will not want to have a cloud-based application. Therefore, then the shared services data modeling, the data lake where it exists, would be level 3.5 of the Purdue model. Therefore, then you can communicate down and you can communicate up. You got an unfair advantage. You worked on some of this with me. One more. We'll go with one more question. We've got less than 2 minutes. So, next question.
First, I want to call out, you have a quote from one of my dear friends at Amoroso. Do you know him?
No.
Oh, okay. That sounds exactly like it. It's great insight. But you go back to the page about the fabric.
Yes.
Michelle, I think I heard you say, where did you talk about fabric?
So we introduced the fabric in 2016. It's 4 years old. And it integrates Fortinet products as well as about 120 different vendors, inclusive of all of our competitors.
But you said you were evolving, you're moving forward. Can you just get into that?
Well, I think evolving the fabric is it's a constant evolution, right? And actually, one of the notes that I wrote is security is a learning process, right? And this is where this ties into what you're doing is artificial intelligence pieces. We need artificial intelligence in the future to be able to iterate learning within security. In the year 2000, when I started, in the year 1992, when I started in security, people didn't know to put firewalls on the internet. In the year 2000, we introduced stateful packet inspection, but we didn't realize that all that's going to do is change the behavior so that the users are being targeted with spam. Once we recognized the spam, then we started to realize, we have to train the users not to click on links to be able to connect out because that breaks the stateful firewall. So with that, for me, is security is an iterative process. I guarantee you everybody in the room will never be satisfied with the level of security that you're receiving at any given point in time. And the reason why is because it has to continuously change. So the fabric, in my mind, is continuously changing. It's being able to change the industry. I talked about empathy earlier. We went from square competition with our competitors to cooperation with our competitors. And we did that in the early 2000s from the perspective of threat research. We're now just applying it to product.